Alrighty, welcome back to the Balkin Baseball Show, everybody. I'm going to get right into it. The Los Angeles Dodgers are in big trouble. If you're a Dodgers fan, you've probably seen some pretty alarming headlines over the last couple of weeks. Mark Walters selling the Lakers, his business empire is under federal investigation, and billions of dollars connected to his insurance companies are being questioned. And suddenly people are asking one very obvious question: could the Dodgers be next? Answer to that, not right now. Answer to that, not right now. In fact, Dodgers president Stan Kasten has been very clear, saying the Dodgers are not going to be for sale, whether now or in the near future. But the story here surrounding Mark Walter, Guggenheim, TWG Global, and his other businesses is very complicated. Depending on how things develop, it could eventually have major implications for the Dodgers. So to start, who exactly is Mark Walter? Before we get into the financial situation, we need to understand who we're talking about here. Mark Walter is the controlling figure behind one of the most powerful sports ownership groups in the world. In 2012, Walter led the group that purchased the Dodgers for approximately $2.15 billion. And since then, the Dodgers have transformed into one of the most successful organizations in baseball. They've won multiple World Series. They've become one of Major League Baseball's biggest spenders, and they've built an organization that has consistently competed at the highest level. And Walter's sports portfolio expanded far beyond baseball. He became involved with the LA Lakers, the Los Angeles Sparks, Chelsea FC, TWG Global, and many other major sports properties. But here's where things get complicated. Mark Walter isn't just a guy who owns sports teams. He's also a massive financial businessman, and his sports ownership is connected to a much larger network of companies and investments. That's where Guggenheim and TWG Global enter the story, and that's where things start to get messy. Think of Walter's empire like a giant web. On one side, you have sports, like the Dodgers, the Lakers, Chelsea, and other investments. And on the other side, you have the financial businesses, including insurance companies and investment operations. The issue now being examined by the federal authorities involves money moving through those financial businesses and investments connected to Walter's broader business empire. According to recent reporting, two Walter-controlled life insurers restated roughly $21 billion in loans as related party transactions. Federal prosecutors and the SEC are investigating whether financial relationships and potential conflicts were properly disclosed. Huge disclaimer. This is where I want to make something very clear. Being investigated does not mean Mark Walter has been found guilty of anything. There have been no criminal convictions here. The investigation is about whether certain financial arrangements were properly disclosed and handled. That's an extremely important distinction to make. But regardless of what ultimately happens, legally, this situation creates a major problem, which is uncertainty. And uncertainty is something that can make investors, regulators, and financial institutions very uncomfortable. This is where the timing becomes fascinating. Mark Walter acquired control of the Lakers at a roughly $10 billion valuation. Now, just barely over a year later, he's agreed to sell the franchise at a reported $12.5 billion price tag to a group involving Josh Kushner and former Disney CEO Bob Iger. That is an absolutely enormous number, and naturally people started asking, why sell the Lakers so soon? The answer is we don't know everything. However, the timing is impossible to ignore. Walter's financial empire is facing scrutiny. His insurance businesses are dealing with regulatory concerns, and his company has now agreed to replace up to $6.5 billion in related party investments with assets that aren't connected to Walter's own businesses. That doesn't necessarily mean that Mark Walter is broke, and that's an important point that I make. It means his financial structure is under pressure and is being massively reorganized. And selling a tremendously valuable asset like the Lakers can provide, very clearly, a huge amount of liquidity. So whether you want to call it a strategic sale, a financial restructuring, or something in between, the Lakers sale is very significant. This is where Dodgers fans start to panic, because if Walter's willing to sell the Lakers, what about the Dodgers? And honestly, I can see why people are getting to that question. However, the Dodgers are an incredibly valuable asset, more so than the Lakers. They're probably one of the most, if not the most, desirable sport franchise in the Western world and possibly the entire world. And if someone needed to raise billions of dollars, selling the Dodgers would certainly accomplish that. There are already reports discussing potential interest from people who would love the opportunity to buy the team if it ever became available. But the most important thing you need to know, there is currently no for sale sign in front of Dodgerland. Even the CEO, Stan Kasten, as I mentioned earlier, has come out and addressed the speculation very bluntly that the Dodgers are not being sold. So what does it actually mean for the Dodgers? The short answer, basically nothing. The Dodgers are still operating. The front office is still operating. Andrew Friedman is still running baseball operations, and the team is still trying to win. And like I said, according to their CEO, Stan Kasten, Mark Walter remains deeply committed to the Dodgers, as well as the team not being for sale. This is something that I think gets lost when you see financial headlines, that a sports team isn't like a checking account. You can't just wake up one morning and decide, let's sell the Dodgers. There are ownership structures, there are minority partners, there are MLB approval processes, there are contracts, television agreements, and enormous strategic considerations involved. So the Dodgers aren't suddenly going to disappear because Mark Walter's other businesses are having massive problems. I would expect the Dodgers to continue operating just as normal. Now we get to the interesting part, because while the Dodgers aren't for sale, there are several things I would watch very closely. Number one, the federal investigation. If the investigation ends without major consequences for Walter and his businesses, this entire situation could eventually fade into the background. But if regulators or prosecutors uncover something much more serious, that could change everything. Number two is Walter's other assets. The Lakers aren't necessarily the only asset that could move. There have also been reports about Walter potentially selling or reducing his position in Chelsea, and the more sports asset Walter sells, the more people are naturally going to wonder whether the Dodgers could eventually become a part of that process. And number three is whether the Dodgers organization itself changes. This is probably the most important thing for baseball fans. Does anything change with Dodgers leadership? Does Walter remain completely committed? Does the ownership group remain intact? And do minority partners become more involved? Those are the big things I'd be watching, because sometimes the biggest sign of changing ownership isn't a for sale sign, it's changes behind the scenes. So let's look into the future here. These are more long-term scenarios that could happen. Scenario number one is everything just blows over because, it's the Dodgers. Scenario number two, Walter restructures his sports empire, and this one is the most interesting because Walter could decide that he wants fewer sports investments, maybe that the Lakers are gone, maybe Chelsea goes, maybe other investments are reduced, but the Dodgers remain the centerpiece. And I could see this being the very likely and most logical outcome, because the Dodgers, again, aren't just another investment. They've been one of Walter's and his ownership group's flagship sports properties for more than a decade, and the organization has become incredibly successful. And then there's scenario number three, the one that nobody wants to talk about. What if the financial pressure becomes significant enough that Mark Walter eventually needs to sell the Dodgers? Again, there is zero indication that this could happen right now or in the future, but long term, it is absolutely possible, and we cannot rule it out. If that day ever comes, it could potentially become one of the largest transactions in sports history. The Dodgers are an enormously valuable franchise, and you'd probably have to include an incredible number of billionaires, investment groups, and sports ownership groups just to get a deal done. In fact, there are already reports suggesting potential buyers would be interested if the Dodgers ever came onto the market, but again, we are far from that. Takeaway for Dodgers fans: what can you actually learn from this, see from this, and project for this? My opinion, don't panic. The Dodgers are not currently being sold. It's been said a million times throughout this video and throughout the press over the previous few days, but you can't ignore the story. Mark Walter's financial empire is dealing with some serious scrutiny, and the Lakers sale is massively significant. Billions of dollars of investments are being reorganized, and the investigation is still developing and, for the most part, barely underway. And honestly, that is what makes the story super fascinating. For more than a decade, Mark Walter and the Guggenheim ownership group have been one of the biggest reasons the Dodgers have operated the way they have. Big payrolls, huge investments, star players, World Series championships, deferred payments, and a massive commitment to winning. So the question isn't necessarily, are the Dodgers going to be sold tomorrow? Because right now the answer is very simply no. The much more interesting question is, what does Mark Walter's changing finances look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe even 7 or 10 years from now? Because if his financial situation stabilizes, the Dodgers can continue business as usual. If he restructures his sports portfolio, the Dodgers could become the centerpiece. And if the situation deteriorates rapidly, well, then that's a conversation about the Dodgers sale that becomes very, very real. But for now, though, the Dodgers are still Mark Walter's team, and according to the people running the organization, they're not going anywhere. And that's going to do it for this one. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe to the Balkin Baseball Show, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Mark Walter will still own the Dodgers 5 years from now? Do you think anything happens to Walter in the future, even at the end of this season as the investigation persists? And again, before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment what you think. And if you want more MLB news, analysis, and completely unfiltered baseball discussion with as minimal or average knowledge as possible. You know where to find me. Take care.